I'm Eli Navarro, 29, a graphic designer and the second oldest grandchild in a family that's never really known what to do with me. The church hall was buzzing with cousins and chaos. Flashbulbs from iPhones lit up the corners where family cliques gathered around matching sleeves of freshly inked skin. The chairs were arranged in a crooked horseshoe. A folding table held a half-eaten cake decorated with a tattoo machine drawn in icing and the words, "Bloodline, bonded forever." I stood near the back, clutching the plastic fork they gave me with a crumb-smeared plate. Not sure why I'd come early. Grandfather's memorial hadn't even started. I hadn't spoken more than 3 words to most of them in months, some in years. But this gathering wasn't about him. Not really. Everyone was here to show off the new family tattoos. A secret design. A bloodline crest, they called it. My Aunt Carla had orchestrated the whole thing. She stood like a general beside the cake, pointing to each inked arm, taking photos for the family group chat I wasn't in. I drifted closer to the table, just enough to glimpse the tattoo a black swallow curled around a compass, with the birth year of grandfather etched beneath. It was beautiful, clean, precise, and not mine. Aunt Carla turned, phone still aimed. "Oh, Eli," she said, pausing. "Didn't know you were coming. I said I RSVP'd in the email." I replied, softly. She gave a tight smile. "Right. Well, the tattoo artist only had slots for immediate family." I blinked. "I'm immediate family." She looked away, already angling her phone toward my cousin Mason. "Yeah, but you know this was for the ones who were closer to him." The words hung heavy. Closer. As if all the years I'd spent sketching at Grandpa's bedside meant nothing compared to Sunday brunches I was never invited to. My plate cracked in my grip. I set it on the nearest chair and stepped away from the group. "Sorry, sir," said a voice from behind. I turned and saw a teenage volunteer in an oversized vest gesturing to the aisle. "Family rows are reserved. There's seats in the back. Family rows. Reserved." I nodded slowly and walked toward the back pews as people filed in. Their shoulders brushed mine without acknowledgement. Their whispers didn't hush when I passed. And for a moment, I questioned why I had shown up at all. If you've ever stood in a room full of relatives and still felt like a stranger, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel invisible too. The organ groaned to life. Everyone turned toward the front. Aunt Carla adjusted her veil, dramatic as ever. Mason opened the program and cleared his throat. But before anyone could speak, a voice cut through the room. "Where's Eli Navarro?" I turned. Head swiveled. And there she was, Reverend Jules, grandfather's closest friend, walking down the center aisle with a weathered envelope in one hand and a microphone in the other. The last words of George Navarro were to be read by his chosen grandchild, she said, her voice ringing through the church, the only one he ever trusted to carry his legacy. Murmurs rippled, eyes landed on me, and as I stepped forward, pulling back the cuff of my sleeve to reveal the ink etched over my heart handwritten. In his own trembling scrawl, silence fell. The ink still felt warm under my skin, though it had healed weeks ago. The letters were jagged, imperfect, unmistakably his. My grandfather's signature, traced straight from the last letter he ever wrote me, wrapped around my ribs like a secret whispered in ink. "You saw me, even when I was fading." I stepped forward, eyes flickering across the sea of relatives, suddenly frozen in their folding chairs. Carla's mouth had parted just enough to let in the fact that she wasn't in control anymore. Reverend Jules held out the envelope, her palm slightly trembling, and I took it with both hands. The paper was thick, handmade. He'd used that same kind when he used to write letters to the editor of the local paper. signing off with his favorite quote from Baldwin: "You have to go the way your blood beats." I didn't rush. I slid the letter out, unfolded it carefully, like opening a fragile door I had been standing behind my whole life. "My dear family," I began. My voice surprised even me, clear, steady, not angry, not even bitter. Just real. If you're hearing this, I'm no longer breathing, but if you're listening, then I'm still being heard. Silence. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. This is not a letter of forgiveness, or blessing, or sentiment. It is a naming. It is the naming of who carried me through the final years, who remembered I was more than a title or a ghost at the table. I paused and looked up, eyes scanning the front row where Carla sat tight-lipped, where my cousins had sunk into their seats. I name Elijah Navarro as my witness, my heartbeat, my legacy. Something cracked in the back of the room. Someone dropped a phone. No one moved to pick it up. I kept reading, but I was only half looking at the page now. I'd memorized his handwriting long before I traced it into my skin. I knew what came next. He saw me not as a burden, but as a man still filled with stories. He carried me to my chair when my bones failed. He laughed at my same jokes. He read to me when the words got blurry. He asked me about the war, and he listened. You all say I loved him, but only he loved me back. The paper fell to my side. I folded it gently, slid it back into the envelope. The Reverend placed a hand on my shoulder, then turned back to the crowd. "George's ashes will be scattered as he requested in the orchard he and Eli restored together, and per his final wishes, no one but Eli may speak today." That did it. Aunt Carla stood abruptly, voice sharp. "This wasn't the plan." "No," I said, turning to face her. "It wasn't your plan." She glared, lips twitching. "You excluded the whole family." I looked at her the same way I'd looked at the framed photo in Grandpa's hallway, the one where he's young and smiling, holding a compass in one hand, me on his knee. "You excluded yourself," I said. Simply, it didn't feel victorious. It didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like truth. Then someone clapped. It was slow, soft. I turned toward the sound. Uncle Manuel, Grandpa's only brother, sat in the second row, his hands coming together rhythmically. "He told me years ago," he said quietly, "said the rest of us forgot how to look people in the eye, said you never stopped seeing him." The applause didn't spread. It didn't have to. The point had landed. I walked back down the aisle, past the family tattoos, past the folding chairs. I sat near the back again, but not because I was told to. I sat there because I chose to. The rest of the ceremony was brief. No one argued with Reverend Jules. No one tried to speak again. The slideshow played. Pictures of Grandfather as a boy, as a soldier, as a man covered in orchard dust, and finally, an image of me and him, planting the last apple tree that had taken root after the fire. I stared at it for a long time, listening to the soft rustling of people around me, but no one said my name. They just stared and kept quiet. Later, after the hall emptied, I stayed behind. The reception had moved outdoors, but I stood in the sanctuary alone. The air smelled like lilies and wood polish. The light was softer now, filtered through high-stained glass. I touched the ink on my chest through my shirt. Not everyone deserves to be part of the same story just because they share a last name. I heard footsteps behind me. "You really got his handwriting," Mason said. He wasn't sneering now, just quiet. I nodded. "He didn't tell me," he added, "about any of it." I shrugged. He didn't talk much at the end, but he still said what mattered. Mason's eyes flicked away. "We just thought you weren't around." I said, "just not where the cameras were." He let out a small laugh, hollow and sad. Guess we missed a lot. Yeah, I replied, walking past him toward the door. You did. Outside. The air was sharp with approaching rain. I crossed the parking lot slowly, not looking back. Envelope in my jacket, tattoo under my shirt, and his words echoing like quiet thunder in my chest. Back at my apartment. I peeled off the black dress shirt and stood in front of the mirror. The signature was still there across my ribs. Black ink settled deep under the skin. It hadn't faded. If anything, it looked stronger now, as if the words had grown into me. I ran a hand over it slowly. You saw me, even when I was fading. Grandfather's words. Not a poem, not a quote from some book. Just one sentence, written in shaky ballpoint ink on the back of an orchard receipt 2 months before he died. I'd folded it carefully, kept it in the back pocket of my sketchbook. Until the morning I sat in the tattoo chair and said, I want this. Exactly as it is. Don't clean it up. The artist had blinked. The handwriting's pretty uneven. I know, I said. Leave it. I stared at myself now bare chest, faint orchard tan still clinging to my arms. A body that didn't belong to suits or dinner parties. I'd inherited his sloping shoulders and wide hands. Everyone said I looked like him. No one ever meant it as a compliment, and that's probably why they left me out of the tattoo pact. I turned from the mirror and walked into the kitchen. A tin of honey sat on the counter, next to a mason jar of dried lavender remnants from the last package I had mailed out for the orchard store. Even after Grandfather passed, the orders didn't stop. People still wanted what we had built. Except, now it was just me. I checked the store's inbox. 3 new messages. One from a buyer in Oregon asking if we had plans to expand. One from a customer in Wisconsin saying she'd planted her own tree with one of our grafts. And one from someone named Claire Navarro, my cousin. I hesitated before clicking. Subject your tattoo A. Eli. I saw the handwriting on your chest at the service. I recognized it. Grandpa used to write me letters when I was little. He'd sign the same way. That's how I knew it was real. I didn't get the family tattoo either. Carla said it was just for the core. I guess we're not that. But I wanted to tell you. Thank you. For saying what he couldn't. For making them sit and listen. I think he needed that. Maybe we all did. Claire. I stared at the message for a long time. I hadn't talked to her in nearly a decade. I remembered her as the girl with the quiet eyes and the notebooks full of pressed leaves. She'd left for college in Montana and never came back for holidays. I replied quickly. Thanks for writing. Claire. I remember his letters too. He wrote them like he planted trees slow, deliberate, never rushed. I think we were lucky, even if they didn't see it. I paused, then added, let me know if you ever want to visit the orchard again. I'm still here. I hit send. The door buzzed unexpectedly. I jumped slightly. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked over, pressed the intercom. Hello, silence. Then a voice. Eli, it's Jules. Reverend Jules. I buzzed her up. A moment later, she stepped inside my apartment with her hair slightly damp from the drizzle and a soft smile tucked behind her lips. She held something under her arm. I figured I'd drop this off, she said, handing me a manila folder. I found it while going through George's storage trunk at the chapel. Thought it belonged with you. I opened it slowly. Inside was a sketch, a blueprint. Really. Detailed outlines of the orchard rows, each tree labeled, dates scrawled in the margins. At the bottom, Navarro Roots Project. Final phase. With Eli. My throat tightened. You two planted over 80 trees together, she said. Did you know that? I nodded. We stopped counting at 60. Said the rest were for the wind. She smiled. He loved that. I set the folder on the counter, gently. He used to tell me you were the only one who never asked him for anything. she added, her tone softer now. You just showed up, week after week. Didn't even ask if we mentioned anything. I didn't want anything, I said. She shook her head. You got more than anything. You got the part of me that wasn't performative. We stood in silence for a while. The window caught faint streaks of rain sliding down the glass, like the orchard mist I used to wake up to. You think they'll come around? I asked quietly. The family I nodded. I think people notice truth when it's too late, she said. But sometimes, late is better than never. After she left, I sat by the window for a while. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I felt hollow, in a clean way, like a field after harvest. Something had been taken, but something had also been proven. That night, I opened Grandfather's old toolbox, the one he'd given me during the last autumn we spent working together. Tucked inside was a rusted compass, the same one from the tattoo design they all now wore, believing it had been theirs to begin with. I turned it over. There, scratched into the back, were 3 initials EJN, Elijah James Navarro. I set it beside my sketchbook. Then I turned off the light. The next morning, I woke before the sun. No alarm, no noise, just that quiet pulse of habit Grandfather had drilled into me years ago. Trees don't wait for you to finish your coffee, he used to say, handing me gloves before I'd even finished yawning. The orchard lay 30 minutes outside town, where the roads narrowed and the buildings gave way to fields and forgotten fences. I took the back route, past the dried-up creek and the shuttered bait shop. Everything still smelled like memory. The gravel crunched as I pulled up beside the old barn. Morning fog sat heavy over the rows of trees like a wool blanket. The dew hadn't burned off yet. I stepped out and breathed in. Earth, sap, cedar oil. I unlocked the side door and flicked on the lights inside. Tools hung neatly on the walls, just as we'd left them. His pruning shears still rested in their labeled hook GN, written in thick black marker. I ran my fingers along the edge of the workbench. Dust, but not decay. It was all still alive. I grabbed a rake and stepped outside. Working in the orchard was muscle memory now rake. Check roots. Clear fallen fruit. Make note of pests or rot. The branches of our oldest tree, the one we planted together after his first cancer diagnosis, had begun to droop slightly. I'd have to support them soon. As I worked, I remembered. Grandfather never called me by my full name, just E. Said it saved syllables for the real conversations. We used to talk about everything out here, about the war, about grief, about how families can sometimes break without anyone raising their voice. You don't need to yell to make someone feel small, he said once, after Carla had left early from one of his birthdays without so much as a hug. I used to think he was just being poetic. But after the memorial, I understood exactly what he meant. Mid-morning, I saw a car roll up. I didn't recognize it at first. A dusty red SUV. The driver hesitated before stepping out. Then she did jeans, loose sweater, notebook in hand. Claire. She waved once. I met her halfway up the gravel path. Hope I'm not intruding, she said, brushing hair from her eyes. Not at all. I'm just clearing the old section. She looked around. It's so much bigger than I remember. It grew. Or maybe you just haven't seen it since you were 10. She smiled at that, quiet and real. I led her through the rows. She walked slowly, fingers grazing leaves as she passed. He used to send me clippings in the mail, she said, pressed between wax paper. Said they were from the tree that never gives up. That was this one. I pointed. Root rot twice. Struck by lightning once. Still gives more apples than the rest. She crouched beside it, ran her hand across the bark. God, it's like touching a heartbeat. I nodded. He always said trees are the most honest thing alive. If they're sick, they show it. If they love the soil, they stay. She stood. So why did he stay here with so many of them leaving? Because I stayed. I said simply, and because no one else asked him to. We walked further, stopping by the compost pile. I handed her a pair of gloves without thinking. She took them. For the next hour, we worked in silence, pulling weeds, turning soil, gathering fallen apples. It was a rhythm, like music played without notes. Familiar, even after all the time apart. When we finally sat, catching our breath on the back porch, she asked, "Why did you do it?" "The tattoo." I looked at her. The sun caught the freckles on her nose, the same ones grandfather used to trace with his pinky when she was little, because he asked me to. I said. She blinked. "Wait. Really?" I nodded. Not directly. But one night, maybe a week before he passed, we were watching the orchard lights come on, and he said, "When I'm gone, people will take the parts of me they like and turn them into stories. But only you know the parts they ignored. Ink those." Claire was quiet for a while. "I wish he'd said that to me," she murmured. "He did," I replied, "in his own way. You just didn't hear it out loud." She turned to me. "You think they'll ever apologize? Carla, Mason, the others?" I sighed, looked out over the orchard. "I don't think apologies matter when they come from guilt. I think the silence after truth speaks is enough." She nodded slowly. We sat like that for a while, watching the wind move through the rows like a slow procession. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I found one more letter," she said. "He wrote it to me, but never sent it." She handed it over. The paper was the same kind he always used, thick, recycled, slightly curled at the edges. I unfolded it carefully. "Claire, some things are inherited by blood, others by choice. I hope when the dust settles, you find the ones who remember you whole, not polished, not perfect, just real. If you ever forget who you are, plant something. It will remind you. Love, Grandpa." I folded it back and handed it to her without a word. She didn't cry. Neither did I. But something in the space between us softened, like old grief finally giving permission to breathe. We said goodbye at the gate. She hugged me quick, tight, then gone. As I watched her drive away, I felt no bitterness, just roots, settled, deep, quiet, and real. A week later, the orchard began to change color. The apples deepened into their final reds and golds, and the leaves lost their brightness, curling like tired hands. Every morning, I walked the rows in silence, checking bark, brushing away webs, whispering promises to the ones that looked like they were giving up. It was the season grandfather had loved most. "Everything gets honest in autumn," he once told me, pulling a cider bottle from the fridge. "You can't fake a harvest." I stopped trying to reach anyone from the family. No one called. No one texted. The family group chat once buzzing with brunch photos, baby milestones, and filtered selfies remained quiet on my end. Claire messaged now and then. She sent me a photo of an apple tart she'd made and joked. Not orchard quality, but I tried. But the others, still silent. I wasn't surprised. They didn't know how to talk unless it was a performance, unless it could be posted or praised. And what I had done at the memorial, what I had said, didn't fit their version of our story. Then, one Thursday morning, I got a voicemail. It was short, tight, from Mason. "Hey, I'm, in town. I was wondering if I could stop by. Orchard. Maybe, I don't know. Text me." I didn't. Not at first. I let the day pass, took the long route to the farm, and lost myself in pruning. I worked until my arms ached and the sun hit the edge of the tree line, but something about the voicemail itched at me, not because I missed him, but because I didn't. By sundown, I texted back tomorrow, 10 a.m., bring boots. He arrived late. Of course. He stepped out of his truck wearing a hoodie and sneakers, glancing around like he expected someone to narrate the whole place for him. I watched him from the barn, arms crossed, letting him stand there a minute before I called out, "You're late." He flinched, turned. "Yeah, sorry. Traffic. There's never traffic here." He smirked, scratching his neck. "Right. Just nerves, I guess." I handed him a rake. He blinked. "You're serious?" I didn't answer, just turned and walked toward the fallen fruit. To his credit, he followed. We worked in silence for almost half an hour. He was slow, missed half the spots, but he didn't complain. Eventually, he said, "I didn't know about the orchard." I didn't look at him, didn't ask. "Yeah," he admitted, "I didn't." We moved to the compost pile. I tossed a few bruised apples onto the heap. He stood there, rake in hand, like a kid outside detention. "Can I ask something?" I shrugged. "Why didn't you say anything sooner? About you and Grandpa. I mean, about how close you were." I finally looked at him. "Would you have listened?" He winced. "Probably not." "That's why." He nodded, jaw tight. I turned back to the pile. He asked again, more quietly this time. "You angry?" I paused, then said, "No." He blinked. "Seriously, angry is loud." I said, "This what I feel, it's quieter, like fog. It just settles around things." He looked away, eyes falling on the nearest tree. "We weren't trying to hurt you, Eli. We just followed Carla's lead. That's the problem." "Mason," I said, "none of you led anything. You just followed." He didn't reply. A few minutes later, he said, "Carla wants to come by." I stopped raking. "Why?" She said she has something for you. From Grandpa's attic. I narrowed my eyes. "Why now?" He hesitated. "Because after the service, a few people started asking questions. About the will, about the orchard, about why he left everything to you. That settled between us like dust." I set down my rake. "He left it to me," I said, "because I showed up. Not for money, not for credit. Just to be here. That's it." Mason nodded. "Carla's struggling with that," he admitted. "She can struggle quietly," I said, "just like I did." He didn't argue. We finished the row, and I offered him a bottle of cider. We sat on the edge of the porch, watching the light fall behind the trees. He looked down at the ink on my arm. "You gonna tell me what that says?" I pulled up my sleeve slightly. It was the second tattoo, smaller than the first. Hidden. It read, "Let what was planted rise." He squinted. "He wrote that too." I nodded. It was in the margin of an old notebook. One he used to keep lists and grafts. Soil changes. What trees needed. What kind of attention. Mason stared at it for a long time. "You think he forgave us?" he asked. I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. But I did know this forgiveness isn't something you demand. It's something you earn in the silence that follows truth. He left just after dusk. No promises. No hugs. I didn't need either. That night, I pulled down the box of letters Grandfather had written me. Some were full pages. Some just a sentence or two. One was an empty envelope with only my name scrawled on the front. I kept them all. I sorted them carefully, then placed them in a wooden case. Tomorrow, I would seal it. Then I would bury it beneath the tree we planted during his last autumn. It wouldn't be a grave. It would be a root. A reminder that some things don't need to be spoken to be remembered. Some love lives not in the noise, but in the quiet that comes after. The next morning, I buried the box. I chose the tree we called the survivor of Fuji that had nearly died 3 winters ago, but came back every spring, defiant and bruised and stubbornly sweet. We'd planted it during one of Grandfather's chemo recoveries. He wore gloves, even though it was July, and made a joke about being too pretty for sunburn. His laughter that day was hoarse but real. I dug slowly, careful not to nick the roots. The soil gave way easily, damp, dark, rich. When the hole was just deep enough, I placed the wooden box inside letters, notes, old photos, and the last Apple tag we ever made together, with his initials written in faded pen. No ceremony, no words, just a breath, a silence, a goodbye that didn't need to be said out loud. I covered it up and placed a flat stone on top. Then I sat beside it, legs stretched out in the grass, watching bees bounce between clover patches. It was almost noon when Carla arrived. I knew it was her before I even saw her face. The crunch of her tires on the gravel was sharper, more purposeful, like she was trying to crush something beneath her. She stepped out of her sleek black car wearing a navy pantsuit and heels completely unsuited for the orchard. Her eyes scanned the field like it owed her something. When she spotted me by the tree, she hesitated, then started walking across the grass. Her heels sank into the mud almost immediately. She didn't stop. "Eli," she said as she approached, voice clipped. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "I didn't," I replied, not getting up. "You just came." She smiled thinly, still with the attitude. "I see, still with the entrances." She stopped 2 feet away, eyeing the stone beside her. "What's this nothing you don't understand?" She ignored the jab and looked around, squinting in the light. "It's bigger than I remember. You've never been." She ignored that too. After a pause, she reached into her leather bag and pulled out the folder. "This is what I came to give you," she said. "It's from Grandfather's attic. We found it behind the old dresser when the estate was being cleared." I didn't reach for it. She sighed, then set it on the grass beside me. "Sketches, plans, all yours." Apparently, we didn't know he was working on another project. I stared at the folder, then back at her. "You didn't know because you weren't part of it." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't come here to argue," she said. "Good, because there's nothing left to win." She crouched slowly, one knee to the ground, and looked at me. Her face wasn't made up like usual. She looked tired, less polished, more real. "You think I hated you?" she said. I shrugged. "I think you erased me, which is worse." She didn't respond right away, just picked a bit of grass from her skirt. "I thought I was protecting him," she whispered. "He was tired. And you were always intense, always pushing, asking questions, stirring things." "I was present," I said. "That's what bothered you?" "No," she said. "What bothered me was that he let you in deeper than any of us, and we didn't know how to catch up." For the first time, she looked small. I exhaled through my nose. "You could have just said that back then. I didn't have the language for it," she said. And I was angry, jealous, maybe. Still am. A little. That's honest. She stood, brushing dirt from her pants. "We're not built the same. Eli, I curate. You expose. And Grandpa needed both of us. But he chose you in the end. I have to live with that." I nodded. "Yes. You do." She turned to go, but paused. "You going to open it? Eventually? Let me know what it says." "I might." She walked back across the orchard, heels sinking again, leaving small craters behind her. I waited until she drove off, then opened the folder. Inside were hand-drawn blueprints. Orchard rows, a barn expansion, a cider room. At the top, In block letters, Navarro Roots, Phase 2, in case he stays. He, me. I flipped through page after page, scribbles in the margins, measurements, notes like ask Eli about solar and check irrigation near old stump. And at the very back, taped to a yellowing piece of notebook paper, was a small pencil sketch of the two of us. I didn't even remember him drawing it. Maybe he did it while I worked. It showed me from the back, shirt half untucked, crouched near a tree with one hand on the trunk. Above me, leaves spiraled like falling confetti. He'd even drawn the rake, leaning nearby. Beneath it, he'd written, "He stayed," even when it got quiet. I closed the folder. Then I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to soften something inside me that had been stone for years. After, I walked the rows, whispered to the trees, touched the bark, let the ink on my skin soak in sunlight. And for the first time since the memorial, I didn't feel like a stranger in my own name. This was my inheritance, not money, not praise, not the hollow echo of family approval. This, soil, roots, a legacy etched in branches and silence. The weather turned colder the next week. Mornings came wrapped in mist, and the orchard rustled with a quieter kind of life. Leaves curled inward. Apples dropped one by one like small, solemn farewells. I found myself waking earlier, not out of duty, but instinct. There was something sacred about autumn's hush, how it didn't ask for attention but still demanded reverence. I spent the early mornings refurbishing the old cider press, a relic we'd nearly tossed years ago. Grandfather had always meant to restore it. One day, he said every season, when the frost stops biting. That day had never come. So now, it was mine. On Wednesday, Claire returned. She showed up just after dawn, standing at the edge of the property line in a rain jacket and work boots. No announcement, no ceremony. Just a smile that asked if it was okay to step into the story again. I waved her in. "You want coffee?" She nodded. "If it's burnt and old, even better." We sat in the barn, sipping from mismatched mugs, the air between us warm and familiar. She glanced at the press behind me. "You actually getting that thing working?" "Trying. It groans more than it grinds, but I think I've got one good batch left in it." She smirked. "You sound like Grandpa." I smiled at that. He always said cider wasn't about apples. It was about patience. We worked side by side most of the day, rinsing fruit, sorting by size, hauling buckets from the cellar to the barn. She moved with quiet precision, the way people do when they're not trying to prove anything. When the press finally wheezed to life and released its first trickle of juice, we laughed like children who'd cracked open a secret door. "Cheers," I said, handing her a chipped glass. "To staying," she replied, clinking it gently against mine. We drank in silence. The cider was sharp, tart, and somehow still sweet, like it knew the truth of everything it had endured. Later that afternoon, I showed her the folder Carla had brought the sketches, the notes, the tiny drawing of me beneath the tree. Claire traced the pencil lines with her finger. "He saw you clearly," she whispered, "even when everyone else turned away." I nodded. "He wasn't perfect, but he never asked me to be someone I wasn't." She looked up. "Do you think that's why they hated it? That he didn't expect you to perform?" I hadn't thought of it that way. But yes. They resented how little I tried to be impressive because he loved me anyway. That evening, we cooked together in the old kitchen at the back of the barn. I hadn't used it much since he passed, but the burners still worked, and the spice rack still held his ridiculous labels: salt truth, cinnamon hope, and paprika for rebellion. Claire chopped onions while I stirred the pot. She talked about Montana, how she'd dropped out of grad school after a year, how she'd moved to a cabin near the Bitterroot Mountains to write. Even though she hadn't finished a single story, I thought if I kept moving, I'd find something, she said. Turns out, I was running away from the one place that ever felt like home. You don't have to explain, I told her. We all ran. I just stopped earlier than most. After dinner, she unrolled a sketch she'd brought with her ink on thick parchment, delicate and detailed. It was a tattoo design, a single tree with roots curling into the shape of a compass, its branches breaking into small, fluttering leaves that resembled swallows in flight. I made it last week, she said. I know I wasn't part of the family tattoo thing, but I thought, maybe this one means something truer. I studied it for a long time, the way she'd merged movement and stillness, how it honored both him and the orchard. I'll go with you, I said. When you get it. She smiled. You already have it. In a way. The next morning, we planted a new tree together. A young gala, small, fragile, still unsure of its own strength. We chose a spot near the cider press, where the sunlight lingered the longest in the afternoons. Claire dug while I held the sapling steady. The soil was cold, but forgiving. As we patted it down, she said, You think it'll make it? I looked at the sky. Only if we stay long enough to see it through. She nodded. And for the first time, I realized she wasn't visiting anymore. She was returning. By the weekend, the orchard was nearly ready for wintering. Nets had gone up, compost spread, saplings wrapped. I found myself talking aloud to the trees again, not because I was lonely, but because I finally trusted the silence between things. One afternoon, I walked to the edge of the property, the farthest corner where the fence had long since collapsed. The boundary line. Beyond it, wild woods stretched out like a memory refusing to be tamed. There, nailed to the last upright post, was something I hadn't noticed before. A rusted plaque. I brushed away the moss. Etched beneath it, in barely legible script, were 4 words planted for who stayed. I stared at it for a long time. Had he put it there years ago, or had someone else I didn't know? But it didn't matter, because I knew what it meant. That staying wasn't about geography. It was about presence. And when I walked back toward the barn, toward the light in the window and the sound of Claire laughing on the phone with some supplier about apple shipments, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the memorial. Not vindication, not victory, but belonging. The kind that doesn't shout, the kind that just holds. The first snow came early that year. It dusted the tops of the orchard trees like powdered sugar on a memory, soft and unannounced. I watched it fall from the barn window with a kind of reverence, as if it were permission to rest. By then, Claire had fully moved in. She took over the small guest cabin just behind the tool shed. We spent our days pruning, bottling cider, shipping orders. At night, we cooked in the barn kitchen, lit candles we didn't need, and left the radio on low like some forgotten heartbeat in the background. We didn't talk much about the others, not because we were avoiding them, but because there was nothing left to say. Family had become a looser word elastic, evolving, no longer confined to those who shared a table only when it suited them. One evening, while packing a holiday box for a longtime customer, I found something folded beneath the wrapping paper. It was a note I had written grandfather the year I turned 16, slipped into his jacket pocket during one of his hospital stays. I didn't expect he'd kept it, but he had. I unfolded it, smoothing the creases. I don't know how to say this out loud, so I'm writing it instead. You're the only one who makes me feel like I'm not invisible. I hope one day I make someone feel that way too. Claire read it over my shoulder. He carried that. I nodded. He must have known you'd find it. I didn't answer. I just tucked it into my journal and left the room. Some things didn't need analysis. They just needed to be held in silence. A few days later, Carla emailed again. She wanted to talk about splitting the orchard. Not legally, she knew she couldn't. But emotionally, symbolically, she said, so everyone still feels part of it. I didn't reply. Instead, I printed the email and burned it in the fireplace beside grandfather's chair. Let the flames chew on the wording, the politics, the hollow attempt at control. Claire came in as the last edge turned to ash. She didn't ask what it was. She just sat beside me, and we shared the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. That weekend, we invited the town over. Not for a grand reopening, not for show, just cider, bread, music, and stories. People wandered between trees, stood by the fire pit, laughed with strangers. Some were customers, others were neighbors. A few were just curious wanderers. We didn't hang up family photos or list surnames on signs. We just called it Harvest Night, and it felt like everything grandfather would have wanted toward the end of the night. I stood by the barn doors watching people leave. One man approached me mid-40s, flannel shirt, hands rough with calluses. "You're George's boy grandson," I corrected. "But yeah." He nodded, pulling something from his pocket. A photograph, weathered and bent. It showed him as a child, seated in the old orchard cart with grandfather standing beside him. He used to bring me fruit when my dad was too drunk to shop. Never asked for money, just left it on the porch. I stared at the photo. "He said one day you'd make this place honest again," the man added, voice thick. I didn't know what to say, so I shook his hand. Later, after the guests had gone, I sat alone at the edge of the rows. Claire had gone to bed. The candles were out. The fire was down to embers. I looked up at the trees, their branches skeletal now, wrapped in winter stillness. And I thought about legacy. Not the kind that gets carved into gravestones or printed in booklets at funerals, but the kind that lives in calloused hands, and shared cider, and letters written without expectation of reply. I thought about the family tattoo, about the fact that I was never invited, about how I never needed it in the first place. My ink was already beneath the skin, written in sweat, in soil, in the simple act of staying. And now, something new was growing, not just saplings, but understanding, connection. A rebuilt sense of belonging, one that didn't require permission or performance. The next morning, the orchard was quiet again. I walked the rows at sunrise, my boots pressed into the light frost, leaving tracks behind me like sentences waiting to be read. When I reached the tree under which I'd buried the box of letters, I crouched and placed my hand on the stone, not to speak, not to mourn, just to acknowledge. After a while, I stood. Then I did what he always did at the end of each season. I turned slowly, arms out slightly, eyes closed, and whispered, "Let what was planted rise."